Good morning, Hische, Rebecca Narragon, Jehoshaphat Kadosh. My name is Rebecca Narragon. I'm a citizen of the Porch Band of Creek Indians, and I am the director of the Office of Economic Development at USET. Making sure everyone is getting admitted. This morning, we are hosting the first of its kind virtual training option focusing on the State Small Business Credit Initiative or the Small Business Credit Initiative, depending on individuals that you talk to. USET SBF, we refer to it as SSBCI. The American Rescue Plan of 2021, the ARPA, we all love our alphabet soups, reauthorized the State Small Business Credit Initiative program to help address the economic fallout of the pandemic and lay the foundation for a strong and equitable recovery by providing direct support to jurisdictions for programs that increase access to credit for small businesses. The SBCI provides funding to tribal nations for small business financing programs, which includes capital access programs, loan participations, loan guarantees, collateral support, and venture equity programs. It also provides for technical assistance to small businesses applying for SBCI and other government programs. Today's session is a follow-up from the Economic Development Training Workshop earlier this year on building and strengthening tribal small business assistance programs. This morning's agenda will feature some time to learn about general program design and application best practices using logic models, and time to learn more about the model, the structure of SBCI programs and what is being forecasted as being allowable or authorized. What we're most excited to offer this morning is time for you and your team members to start working in real time on your community application for SBCI. We asked everyone who registered, and we hope that everyone on this line are representing communities that have already submitted your notice of intent. So notice of intent for SBCI. Sorry, just checking the chat function here real quick. Oh, I'll get to that. As a reminder, December 11th is the next update for when applications to SBCI capital programs for state, territories, the Washington, D.C. area, and tribal governments must be initiated. And the latest guidance that we have received is the application form that will, the physical form that needs to be submitted is forthcoming. To stay current on any latest news and announcements on the SBCI program, please visit the Department of Treasury website, and we'll be adding the link directly to that site in the chat box. In addition, each of you have been assigned to a breakout room. As we mentioned in the later half of the agenda this morning, we look forward to having this space for you to start working on the applications or any questions that you might want to consider after you hear the speakers this morning. So each of you have been assigned to a breakout room. To ensure that we have the correct individuals assigned to each room and that we have your team identified correctly, we might be following up with some of you in the chat box, so be mindful of if any direct messages come to you. When we reach out at that time, when we reach that time in the agenda for the breakout rooms, on the back end, we'll be hitting the button and everything will be automated. So you will not have to do anything or have to monitor or click anything. Once you're in your breakout room and you have any questions or would like to have a one-on-one discussion with our presenters or USET staff, there will be a button that reads invite host to the meeting. That will notify our planning team and we'll make sure that the appropriate individual is invited to that room. These breakout rooms are just for you and your team members and those that you would like to join. Other participants will not be able to hear or see what is typed in the breakout room. And at that time, we'll also be stopping the recording function. So there won't be any opportunity for others to have listening abilities to what is being discussed. And these breakout rooms are available for your team to use as you like. There is no expectation to stay on for the full time. If you would like to stay on and utilize that space, we make it available to you, but do not feel any pressure that you have to stay on till that 11 or 12 noon stop time. The goal is just to have a resource for the team meet and discuss the logic model questions or the SBCI specific questions. So that is it for some welcoming remarks. Our very first presenter is Doug Hoekstra. Doug is USET's grant writer and grant administrator and has been an incredible help to myself and other USET staff. So with that, I'm going to pass this over to Doug for him to present.
Hey everybody, thanks Rebecca. Welcome. So my name is Doug Hoekstra, and I'm the
sorry, Doug, I'm not able to hear you. Was anyone else able to hear Doug? Or maybe could you repeat?
I can hear him just fine.
Yeah, it's not muted, so.
Yeah, I can hear him too, Rebecca.
Thank you. I see.
Might just be me.
Okay, no worries. Anyway, I'm Doug Hoekstra, grant writer coordinator at USET. I've been here about 2 years, and I had quite a bit of experience in the nonprofit realm in Nashville at a family resource center in East Nashville. That was where I got a lot of my experience. And I've also worked as a teacher, and I've worked as a federal grant reviewer. And I've done a version of this grant writing workshop in various guises and locations, like at the Nashville Public Library and at Watkins in Nashville, where I taught, and places like that. And so I like to adapt it and kind of make it interactive, and hopefully we'll have time to do that. We'll see. But for the beginning of it, at any rate, I'll just tee it up. And I mean, really, for me, one of the things that I try to get at in this workshop is kind of using the grant writing process as a tool to sharpen what you do, as much as a end game thing to get the resources, although that is of course the end game. And it's kind of intertwined in terms of how you can use the process in a way to shape your programming and dig deeper, really. And I think often too, obviously in the grant writer role, you work a lot with people whose expertise is programming, and some of those folks have grant writing experience and some don't. But the one thing that I found over the years is people really know their programs back in, like the back of their hand, but often, hey Jerry, they know them so well that often they don't realize how much that they can capture in their grants or in their process that maybe is so second nature to them that they're not even documenting it. So I think one of the tools that really works well to help do this is the logic model, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, I know probably most folks on this call have grant writing experience, but I don't know how many folks are familiar with the logic model. I don't know if you guys can give me a read here real quick. There's somebody. Often they're required in grants, but whether they're required or not, I think they're a great tool, and what we're going to outline is really what that's about. So, hey, Brandy, do you have the share capacity on this? I'm not sure. I can share the screen if not. I know we had the handout that went around. Let me know.
Yes, you should have, I made you co-host, so you should be able to share your screen.
Fantastic. Okay, let's get to that then. Okay, and then we'll kind of I'll walk through some of the introductory items on my worksheet. Can everybody see that okay? I think at this point. All right. So this is like a leftover little intro from like grant writing workshops I do in general, but it kind of like, it summarizes what we just talked about. You know, everyone wants to find the money, but it's really intertwined to the programming. It's the way we collaborate, sharpen service. It's about continuous improvement, you know. Every time you do a grant, even of an existing program, it's an opportunity to analyze it and go through your own internal analysis of what the real solutions are, how close you're getting to the end game. So obviously, the beginning part of that process is where you have your idea for your program. It may be something existence, it may be something new. This is sort of a generic piece, but it's funny because a lot of times, particularly if you ever freelance as a grant writer, people will come to you and go, I need a grant for like, oh, I don't know, economic development programs. And then you would say, well, yeah, but let's drill deeper, right? So obviously the beginning is brainstorming that idea and also finding where the best place for the funding is, because even though all of it looks attractive at times, some things are worth require more effort on the front end or on the back end, and it's about kind of having a little discernment in terms of what you go through. At USET, we do a thing called the grant pursuit form, which also lays out a lot of those pieces, and it'll lay out things like your direct costs and your indirect, whether or not there's match money and all those sorts of things, right? And that's part of the brainstorming process. So then obviously you think about the need. And a thing that I've run into a lot too is folks often think of need as sort of like as the demos, as the demographics, right? And particularly in terms of couching it as distressed in many cases, because that's what many funders ask for. But it's really a little deeper than that in the sense of it's more about what is it like on the ground, right? What are the missing pieces? What are the barriers, maybe? What happens if you don't do your program? And it's funny because I've been seeing that question a little more. I think that's a really good question for a funder to put in, because obviously doing your program has an objective, but what happens if it didn't exist, right? What happens if it's been going on the way it has been? So, you know, these are kind of like your sort of little brainstorming pieces. Then once you know that, like, okay, we're in the ballpark on this opportunity, and it's something that really is worth digging deeper, right? Then we get to the logic model. And I mean, I tend to, when folks ask me, I say, well, do the logic model, do the budget, because these are like, in a way, everything that you'll ever have in the grant is in the logic model. Often the pieces of a logic model are the questions of a grant. And I think, and this certainly was the case with me, the first time I ever started working on these at a previous place I worked, we did a big Department of Education grant. And we didn't do a logic model. And one of the things we got dinged for was not doing it. And so I had to research and figure it out because I didn't know. And it seemed more complicated than it is. And I think a lot of the things about it is, it's like anything in that you can knock one out pretty briefly as an overview, but then you can also dig deeper and you can also come back to it. So, I mean, that's probably true of a grant, of any piece of writing, of any sort of outline one might do. But anyway, they're often not scored, but they love seeing them as reviewers, and they really help you in the process, right? And I pulled this from the CDC. A logic model is a graphic depiction or roadmap that presents the shared relationships among the resources, outputs, outcomes, and impact, which is right. I mean, it's about how things connect. And every really successful program, and therefore every successful grant, has those connections. And you know, I've worked as a reviewer, and I don't know if any of you have done that, but you're often on reviewer teams, and you have to do you have to be in sync. Like if there's a big discrepancy in your scores, you'll have to discuss it and talk about it, and you report it out, and then it goes up the ladder. But the thing that you really see in grants that don't work is that this lack of connection. And the lack of connection makes it look, whether it's true or not, that the program isn't thought out. Now, maybe the program's thought out and people didn't get it on the page, but that's how it looks. So the logic model, in addition to being a great tool, also helps make that super clear. So anyway, that's the overview. Now I've put in some samples here, and then I think we're actually going to have time to at least maybe start to do one in real time. But I pulled in a couple examples. This is just a standard template, and this has, now these things modify a little bit, and sometimes the funder will have a specific format, but this has most of the key elements, right? So you put in the title, the problem the project will address, or the theory of change. And that's kind of important too, because theory of change is kind of like a highfalutin way to put it, but really, I mean, what happens? You know, I mean, you can do a thing, but what is the change? And so I think that's really important to think about. It's sort of like your thesis statement. Anyway, so it starts on the left. This is from Kellogg Foundation. Starts on the left. You know, you've got your inputs, which are your resources. And this is generally everything that pours into your program. So this is the people that exist on staff that are doing it. It's the people you may hire. It's your backline staff. It's your partners. Often it's your, you know, your capital resources. It may be like if you're doing a health program, it's your facilities. It's everything. It may be if you've got an evaluator, it's your evaluator. It's everything, whether or not you're asking for it in the grant. So that's, and this is a good way to think about. To me, this is connected to budget, because when you lay all these things out, you might find out that you have some resources in some areas that you didn't think. Like you might think that, like, oh wait, you know, the evaluation teams on our partners are really good. Maybe we don't need to ask for that extra person. And if you have a limit on your budget, that helps. So these inputs, though, they drive your basic activities. And this is what everybody tends to do best on a logic model, because everybody knows right away what they want to do, right? And so, you know, and it doesn't have to be, again, it doesn't have to be huge. It could be just like 3 or 4 key activities. But these are the things that you'll do. You'll have the meetings. If it's an education program, it's the classes. If it's a health program, it might be, you know, visits to a clinic. It's all these things that happen, right? If it's an assessment process, if it's creating a you know, a manual or guidebook for everybody to use, you know, education curricula, all these things, that's the activities. So these inputs drive these activities, which drive the outputs. And outputs are a thing that people usually come to pretty easy too. They're like a dosage. They're the number of things. So if you have an activity, say you're doing a tutoring class, and the activity is, you know, helping people, helping kids with literacy, and it's a class. It's a class of like, I don't know, 15 students. Well, the output is going to be the number of times you do it. So it might be like 12 classes taught or quarterly classes. Sometimes funders will ask for the output number specifically, but sometimes you don't even have to pin it down. It's just the number of. So an activity is like teaching a class, the output is number of classes. So, or if you're going to distribute information, if you're going to distribute materials, the number of flyers, the number of social media hits, whatever those things are, the number of hours, if you're doing a counseling program, or a substance abuse program, sometimes that's hours. So that's what the outputs are. Now, funnily enough, the outcomes are often the thing that I find that people struggle with so much, because everybody knows, they're like, well, yeah, we're going to do this. It's going to be great. It's going to transform the community. It's going to transform, you know, the lives of the folks we serve and everything, which is true. But the outcomes is, what's the change? And that's also probably the hardest to measure, right? Now, some grants will give you predetermined outcomes, others don't. But in any case, you should be able to like infer a change, because otherwise you're doing it and just doing it over and over and rinsing and repeat, and nothing ever happens, right? Now, another worry that I think folks run into is overpromising, which is totally valid. You don't want to put outcomes in there that are too ambitious, or things that you know, you just can't do on this amount of money or this amount of time. But it's important to remember it's the same kind of thing. You don't necessarily have to put like 80% of participants do this. You can just say participants increase their knowledge. And we'll get into that a little bit as I go through a couple of the examples. And I would also argue personally that this is helpful to do just for yourself, because it's a thing where you may not realize how much impact your program really has. And by just even spitballing and brainstorming the outcomes, you're going to come to that place, I think. So, any questions so far? I'm going to move on to a couple real life examples here, if we're good. I don't want to rush this too much, because I know we have a limited time. So if I'm talking too fast or something, just let me know. All right. So I pulled one here. I pulled a couple to give us brief examples. And this is one I did at a previous place I worked. And it was about youth employment, right? And this is also like an AmeriCorps logic model I did once, in that sometimes you can pile in multiple programs in one logic model. And that's kind of what this is. This was a program to help high school youth get employment, right? And also get work skills and improve their education. So it was triple fold. So because of that, the logic model was a little more complex, and you can see I and my collaborators, we broke it down a little bit. We had the proposed people we were asking for, the existing people, the other funding, the facilities themselves, because it was multiple location, and all these partners. Because it was employment, we had to partner with all these different people. Now, this again was super important, because it helped us think about what we really had, where we might not have. And in this case, as we thought about it, it was everything from these universities, the corner to corner, and places like that were places that put the kids to work. But we were really drawing on the resources of the housing agency and all these other folks too, right? So that was valuable. And it's an extensive list in this case, right? but it's good to put it in there because then they know that you've thought it through and you've thought it through. In this case, the activities were broken down into, we had to recruit kids out of school and in school, both. So we had to break them down. And when you're doing this with at-risk kids, you're doing everything from what you would think you would do, like, you know, job skills and case management, right? That's kind of obvious. But you're also doing things like peer-centered activities, adult mentoring, right? Connections. We created a panel. They love this, and it's a good thing to do always. Create little cohorts or panels that help disseminate information and help continue your program, right? So we had all these supports, and all these supports were required because they were high-risk kids. The outputs are, as we just talked, the number of youth enrolling, the number assessed. And this is an interesting thing because often folks will combine all these things, but you can really break them out, which looks good for one thing, but also is real because there's so many that are going to enroll. There's so many that are going to be assessed. There's so many that are going to get it. There's so many that make it to the sessions. And so this helps you break down the tiers of how a program really rolls out. And in this case, we had the outcomes broken down into learning and working and learning and working, meaning they had to get back into the school loop. You know, they strengthen their skills. These are, and this is a good point too, since I'm looking at this, active verbs, right? They're strengthening their skills. They're receiving a credential. They're applying. Things are happening. These outcomes are showing change. They're developing work skills. They develop awareness. So you can see that we didn't have to put a particular number on this, like 80% of the kids re-engage. It wasn't required, but we still had to show change, okay? And then in the long-term outcomes, this is a good thing. And in this case, we broke down long-term outcomes and impact, but they're kind of the same. And depending on the grant, like sometimes they'll ask you for a 5-year outcome or something. But basically, this is your opportunity to dream big and to think about if we do this program over a period of years or we're truly successful, what does it look like? And in this case, we were saying, well, look, they're going to succeed in the workforce. Ultimately, post-secondary rates attain. And this is an interesting one that people don't always think about. The community experiences an increase in workers. And so if you think about it, you can make the case that if these kids are not, they get this job skills and they stay in school and they get that experience, they'll be more likely to not only go to college, but to be like more successful, I guess, for lack of a better word, and a more engaged part of the community. Well, what would that do to, in this case, Nashville as a whole, right? It would increase like our social and intellectual capital. So those are your long-term visions. And another thing that I think people kind of overlook, and it's a great thing to put in these and in the grant, because that's really what it's about. In all these grants, not only are you serving this immediate group of people, but by doing that, you're improving the strength of all of us. I mean, it sounds very, aspirational or idealistic at times, but that's what it's about. And I think it's important to get that in here. So that's what that is, the long-term and the impact. I put an example in here, which I won't go through, but it's one I did with the folks in our OERM department here at USET. So you see a little different wrinkle here because of, obviously we're working in tribal nations, right? And sovereignty is always a piece of that. Increased capacity within the tribal nation makes it different. But in the actual activities and the things going to outputs is very similar, right? It's number of staff attending, number of participants, number of certificates earned in this case. I mean, we could do a logic model on this meeting and do pieces of this. And this also is an example from the CDC. And I just figured to pull one that I had nothing to do with and see what they might do that was different. I know a lot of us do CDC grants. So they broke it down a little bit differently in terms of how they did the format. But again, you have some of the same things. This is interesting to note though, because Roger the cat wants to get involved in the logic model here. Anyway, the interesting thing here to me, and why another reason why I wanted to put it in here, was with health things, health grants, it's very difficult sometimes because you have to bring people into the loop of being served even to get to that point of the outcome. But in this CDC example, they have increased asthma knowledge, changed perceptions, that's still a change, right? You know, created discussion in the intervention region, increase information seeking behaviors, which is a good one, you know, change community attitudes, improve self-management, you know. So these are ways that you can get at what the change is without having to say like asthma rates improved, although that would be obviously the long-term or aspirational goal. So I know that's an extremely quick overview, and I know some of you are familiar with this already, but what I typically like to do in these, well, this is the one from Mohawk, St. Regis Mohawk that I did, so I'm going to take that out for now. So what I like to do in these typically, and we can at least get started on it, but to illustrate how really how simple it can be to at least roll it out, is do one in real time. So I don't know if anybody has like a pet project they want to create or have wanted to kick the tires on, but we can do it right now. And this kind of illustrates how much of it is brainstorming. I mean, there's the depth of the knowledge of the program that you know, but as a tool, this is something you can do off the cuff, really. So does anybody have any basic like program ideas they want to spitball the beginning of a logic model on? Yes? No? It can be anything, really.
Feel free to.
How about food and nutrition delivery?
Sorry.
Food. All right, great. Excellent. I'm just going to put it in the activity right here. So what's the, I mean, I can guess what the problem is, but what is the overarching problem?
The relationship between nutrition and chronic disease, say diabetes.
Oh, okay. So relationship between chronic nutrition or chronic disease and malnutrition and lack of nutrition, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And so the theory of change would be, it would be like flipping that, right? But
yeah.
By improving nutrition, it will decrease chronic disease, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I assume, and this is part of the we'll get into this in logic models. I assume this is for a distressed community where there's a lack of access, right?
Or just for that yes, yes, underserved population. Yes.
Okay. Great. All right. So what? Great. That's great. And is this? And one other question for the problem of theory change: is this like what's roughly the population size? Do we know?
Just say a zip code population.
Okay.
I don't know how many people are there.
Yeah, that's cool. Or we could say like a couple census tracts, something like that.
Or if within a program, maybe say 200 participants that have been identified with, as diabetics, something like that.
Great. Okay. So what are the resources that we're going to need for this? What are the inputs? What do we think? There's an existing person probably. Who is that?
Dietitian, some level, maybe. Or, a community health worker.
Right?
Primary care physician.
Yes, that's good. That can be a referral. We need that person in there. Who else? I'm going to put in backline staff like, finance, etc., because they're always involved. But who else?
Just other community-based organizations.
Yes. Whoops. Oh, dang. Let me do this. All right. Community-based organizations like Second Harvest and stuff like that, right?
Exactly. Yes. Food distributors, food kitchens, that type of service.
All right. All right. Anybody else that you can think of? I have something popping into my head. So you can already see from the inputs, we have sort of this network of people who are working to do this delivery, right? You've got your community health worker working with your dietitian, working with your primary care physician, and then you're working with these folks like Second Harvest, right? But what else is in that picture? Like if you're trying to get better food and nutrition services to this population, what else are we missing in that picture? I can think of a thing or two.
Education.
Yes. Would that
training.
would that be through like materials or a person?
Both. Content, prepared content, as well as, some personal interaction with maybe the community health worker.
I'm just going to make a note here. That's going to lead to outreach activities, but we can worry about that in a minute. Okay, so you got education, you're going to need somebody to do the training. So this is maybe something like either your communications person or a part-time educator or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything?
How about your wellness center?
Wellness center, that's good. I can think of at least one other thing here. This is really good. How are you gonna actually mobilize?
If you think about it if it's a program delivery, part of that you have a preset, network of distributors, a clinician on board. So it's like a network you would, kind of opt into. It's a service,
No, that's good. I'm thinking of, and I'll say it then, maybe volunteers go on here too.
Absolutely, yeah.
I was thinking of nuts and bolts volunteers because you're going to need to get the things out, right? Because it's about Now you've built already from the inputs, you've built sort of a three-pronged thing where you have the healthcare workers, you have your partners, actually it's four-pronged, you have your education people, and you have the actual people with the boots on the ground, right?
Yeah.
If you have a community radio station, have a program talks about it.
I'm sorry, what?
If you have a radio station, a community radio station, you can have programs to educate community members about it.
Well, that's good too, yeah. Radio newspaper.
Information.
That's one of your resources. And even social media.
Newspapers, yep.
Yeah. Now we at USET, we have a communications staff, as you know, which might do that work. Now, for different programs, this is obviously a list where you figure out what you need, right? And either part of these people will be added new, or they could be in kind through partners, right? And I mean, that's something that you would have to decide, dependent, new or in kind, dependent on, you know, on the grant dollars, existing dollars, right?
Mhm.
This is really good because you've already built this sort of like idea of how these pieces work together, okay? So, knowing that, generally speaking, the activities go left to right, correct? So, like for your, and we kind of did it in real time, which is great. So for the dietitian, community health worker, primary care physician, all that, what are those activities? And it could be a couple different things. It could be classes held by the work. I don't know if this community, you would have to decide, is it about getting people like comfortable with going to get services? Is it about educating them on proper nutrition? I don't know.
Yeah, it is educating about proper nutrition, but some of the activities just for each participant would be, a screening, some type of screening event, and then an assessment, interventions, and, outcomes. So it's kind of that's the high level workflow.
That's good. So that would be, but I would say that would be for the health people, right? So you're going to have, for the activities, you're going to have screening events. You're going to have individual assessments. And and one of the things about this that's good for the logic model is you're going to have to find if your scope is too broad or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, for instance, we've already done this. It's easy to do the screening events, right? Or relatively. It's probably even easier to get it to the individual assessments. Can you, in a one-year grant, get to the point where you actually do individual interventions with every person you serve, or with even, say, 10%? You have to look at what the grant offers and what you've got and everything to figure that out. I mean, but this lays it out for you to consider. So, but there's also these activities down here that we've talked about. So there's the community-based organizations and Second Harvest and everything. Well, the activity for that would be what? Food distribution, right?
Yes.
Like deliveries.
Mm-hmm.
Right? How about for the training materials? And everybody was talking about the radio, newspapers, social media, and all that. What would those activities look like?
Yeah, there would be a set curriculum around, nutrition, specific nutrition for the disease or the chronic condition.
Right? Creating a curriculum. And then probably sessions to held in partner or something. Curriculum sessions with health and neighborhood partners, say, right?
Yeah.
You guys talked about social media and radio and newspaper, so it would be number of advertisement, or actually I'm getting into outputs, but like advertisements, I don't know, public PSAs, right?
Mhm.
And then actually the volunteers, we would probably want to move up to, they don't really need an activity because they're integrated into, the volunteers would probably support, you know, the food deliveries, the curriculum, all these things. So, and I only have a few minutes here, but we'll take it a little bit further. So the outputs, clearly, these are corresponding now. So screening events, like how many screening events do you think you could do in a year?
I don't know if you could just condense it all to like a food plan. So the output of, you know, the screening, assessment, and interventions is a food plan, and then maybe the number of food plans you want to do per year.
Well, I think that's a great idea, but I would do both. I would put the food plans down here because, and I think you mentioned it earlier, these kind of attrition down, it would be like the screening events, there'd probably be like, you could just be generic and say number of screening events, but I think it's better to plan it. So you'd say like 2 screening events, right? One every 6 months. And then out of that, you would expect whatever, if you got 200 participants, say you're shooting for 100 individual assessments. And then you're probably gonna do 25 interventions maybe the first year. But then you could probably do as high as like 100, maybe the food plans would go up here and you would do like 150 food plans, right? Because the point is people do attrition. And like, just to use the example I used from my previous place, it was always a thing where you get kids in college, but they wouldn't, the idea was retention, right? So you'd always have to say 100 get in, whatever, 75 persist, you know, 50 graduate. And that tends to be the dynamic, but it's something that programmatically you can brainstorm, right? And similarly here then, but the deliveries are better, like monthly deliveries, right? It would be like 1 curriculum, probably, right?
Yeah.
Then you need to decide how many sessions are viable for a year. How many curriculum sessions are, your first part of the year, you're going to be doing the curriculum, probably creating the curriculum. So you're probably only going to be putting it together in the second half of the year, right? So
and delivering it, yeah.
Yeah, how many you think? Maybe 1, 2, or a month, 3?
You know, you're spitballing here. I don't know. Let's say 3 per month.
That might be a little bit much, but this is what you go through, right? Advertisements, PSAs, you're going to do like same kind. I would just say maybe same kind of thing. You could just say first half you're developing it, second half you're delivering it, but it would be like, I don't know, you do like 6 PSAs, right? All right. So, I mean, I'm at the end of my time here. Like I said, it's a short thing, but you get the idea. And then you put these to outcomes, right? Like ideally, like the first group of activities are going to show an increase in knowledge, right? The second, the food deliveries are gonna show an increase in healthy food. In accessing healthy food. Increase in accessing healthy food. And then it's going to be increase in awareness for the PSAs, right? And probably what you're going to, this is also where you're going, increase in community cohesion. It's almost always a thing because all these people are working together. Cohesion or partnerships. And that's the thing that people overlook a lot. Through the process of doing this, you're building a network almost always, right? And you can unpack more. There's probably more in here. And then obviously the long-term outcomes are to better health. Now, I mean, I would just say this is an interesting thing. When you look at it, it's a robust program. Again, because of the way we just spitballed it, you got a program where you're doing health screenings, you're doing education, and you're getting food to people. Either one of those could be a separate program on its own. Now, it's fine to have all three intertwined if you have the money to do it. But I think the whole idea of the logic model and the whole idea of this process is to help you ask those questions ahead of time. So you do this and say your funding isn't quite enough, well, then you can pick off a part of it and you can narrow in, and you've already done the pre-work for the other piece. And to me, that's the advantage of it, because you've done that, you've also saved, not only is it efficient to your program, but you've saved that time, and it's really more efficient too. So anyway, you can get into a lot of nuance in this, but as you can see, you can do a basic one in, like, what do we do, 20 minutes? And, you know, maybe half an hour. And then you can go deeper as you look at your resources, as you discuss it internally and go forward with it. But anyway, that's the nuts and bolts of it. So thanks for the example. That was a good one. And again, I hope this is helpful. And if anybody ever wants to reach out, I can do this with folks one-on-one, or set up little workshops where we just do this, because I have done it quite a bit, and it's an interesting process. I think it's super helpful.
Yes, thank you, Doug. I'll make sure in the chat function, we're going to add Doug's contact information. So in his generous offer that he just mentioned of to have any further follow-up conversations on this, please feel free to reach out to him, or if you can't, reach out to myself, anyone on the USET staff, and we'll make sure to get that arranged. And I can testify from the value of this work. I think in the beginning, I was sort of more focused on when an announcement comes out, just answering the questions and what's needed to be asked in the actual form or in the actual notice of funding opportunity in the NOFOs. And Doug has, I think, added not only his personality and his thoughtful questions, but this tool of the logic model to really slow down to ask these critical questions. Sometimes I'm not as open to answering them, or when the answer doesn't come easily and you have to sit on it and sort of do some reflective. But it's really made the overall product, I think, a lot more effective. And we're able to communicate a story and narrative to funders that I didn't feel, I had some experience with it. I just think it's just really progressed it into a whole new level.
Yeah.
So Doug, thank you for your time this morning.
Yeah.
It was brief.
Super briefly, I want to say thank you for that. But also, I think Rebecca would say, and it just reminds me, because as we've been working on Rebecca's grants, as we go through this every time, they're just better, right? Each one is better. And so it's not like a one and done. And I think that's what because people are running around, they've got a million things to do. And I get that, we're all multitasking. But really, you do this, it becomes more than one and done. You build on it. And I think that's also the value of it. So I just want to add that.
Thank you, Doug. Our next speaker and our final formalized speaker this morning is Ms. Pilar Thomas. Pilar is a partner at the firm Qualls and Brady LLP, where she serves as the firm's in the firm's Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources Practice Group and the Indian Law and Policy Group. She focuses her practice on tribal renewable energy project development and finance, tribal economic development, federal Indian law, and natural resource development. She serves as counsel for several tribes, the Section 17 and tribal business entities. Prior to her legal career, Pilar worked for 15 years in the financial services industry for a Fortune 250 company. She has experience in all aspects of consumer, mortgage, and commercial lending, including underwriting and credit risk. She received her Juris Doctorate from the University of New Mexico School of Law, magna cum laude, and her BA in economics from Stanford University. And some of y'all might be familiar with Pilar's work. She has been a long-standing resource partner, I want to say friend. I remember it was a few months ago. Time is weird now. Months feels like years, years feels like months. But she did I want to say at the early summer period, Pilar and her firm hosted a SBCI introductory call. And when we were forming this idea for this workshop today, specifically for our membership, she was one of the first names that I thought of. And she was super gracious and completely jumped in and said, sure, let's do it. So I'm really thankful that she's able to join us today. And she's going to go a bit into more of the specifics of the SSBCI program. And I think really get to heart of some of the questions that some of y'all might be having. So with that, I'm going to turn over the presentation to you, Pilar. Feel free, you should have co-hosting abilities and be able to share your screen. But if not, let me know.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I don't have the ability to share, so just as a note, if everybody can hear me okay, good morning from Tucson, Arizona. It's a little early for me, but that's okay. I've had my New Mexican coffee this morning, so I'm feeling pretty good right now. Thank you again, Rebecca and USET and USET's Economic Development team for the opportunity to talk about what's now my favorite subject out of all of ARPA, SSBCI, the State Small Business Credit Initiative. Okay, let's see. Do we have... Not yet. Okay, so I've got a presentation. Let me just maybe start out with a show of hands of how many folks are already, feel like you're already pretty familiar with the SSBCI program, the funding amounts, kind of what its general purpose is. Because I can do, while we're waiting for presentation capabilities here, I can do a short intro. Okay, so just a couple of folks. All right, well, let me just quickly give you some background then, because I don't have this in my presentation, but I'm happy to point you to our website. You can go on to my bio at our website at Quarles and Brady. We've recorded, Rebecca talked about these webinars we had. We actually had a series of webinars. We had 4 webinars back in April and May on the SSBCI program where we dug in, at least based on what we knew at the time, into much more detail around these programs. So I'm just going to give a high-level overview of the types of programs that you can develop through the SSBCI program. I'm going to go through some statutory requirements that the tribes have to be able to comply with respect to those programs, and at least our anticipation of policy guidance that we're going to have to comply with as well. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the types of programs in a little bit more detail and some ideas that have already been coming around from Indian country about ways to use this money in order to take advantage of the $500 million or more dollars that will be coming into Indian country. So you've got my background. We're going to walk through just some high level 3 major programs that I think are going to be most likely to be developed by tribes. There's 5 programs in total, but I think 3 kind of tend to stand out in most conversations that I have. We're going to talk a little bit about administration, because there's a difference between designing the program and then administering the program. And in between is an application that you have to complete to go get your money. So hopefully everybody here has filed their notice of intent to participate. As I understand it, Tuesday, I think Rebecca mentioned these information sessions that Treasury is participating in that are being co-hosted by NCAI and the FOA. But as I understand it, Tuesday, Treasury announced that the NOI has been extended until December 11th. So they're really trying to make sure tribes are asking for their money. From what I understand, as of at least the end of last month, when the last due date was for the NOI, there were a little over 300 tribes that had raised their hand. So I'm not sure how they think they're going to get more people to raise their hand if they don't start giving us more information, but we'll see what happens. So just real quick, here's how much money we're talking about. So $500 million in ARPA under the SSBCI program was allocated to tribes. Those monies have already been allocated. Your tribe should have received your notice of how much money you have been allocated. It was based on certified enrollment numbers. You will get more. If you apply for the grant for this funding, excuse me, you will get more money because they will reallocate whatever tribes, the monies that have been allocated to tribes that don't raise their hand, they will reallocate that money to the tribes that do. So they're not going to get 574 or 608 or whatever the number is that Treasury thinks we have of federally recognized tribes, but they're not going to get 100% participation. So we will get, if you raised your hand and you apply, you will get more money based on the final number of tribal participants. Treasury also allocated to the tribes $40 million from the very small business pot. There was in the law $500 million to be spent on very small businesses. So tribes got, there was $500 million, tribes got 40 million of that 500 million. That 40 million was reallocated. So you actually got two pots of money that were allocated to you. Again, this money will be reallocated as well with the 500 million after final applications are in. There's $500 million for quote unquote technical assistance. This is not for your technical assistance. This is for providing technical assistance to small businesses to help them access your programs. There will be a grant application available. It's not available yet. We don't know when it'll be available. We don't know what the criteria is for qualifying for it, but EPA is determined, Treasury has determined that they will allocate or fund technical assistance grants to states, tribes, NBDA, the Minority Business Development Administration out of Commerce, and others in order to provide technical assistance to small businesses. So if you want to help your tribal members, small businesses access SSBCI programs, you can go get money from Treasury through the Technical Assistance Grant Program to pay for that technical assistance that you provide. And I'll show you kind of a model that's being discussed again, how to put some of these monies together. And then finally, there's still $2.5 billion for quote unquote socially and economically disadvantaged small businesses. There's no definition of that term. We anticipate that will probably be the same term used in the SBA world, which, as we know, tribes are typically, or tribal enterprises at least, are typically already designated as socially and economically disadvantaged. But for tribal members, small businesses, they would likely have to qualify. So if they're an 8A, they probably already are socially and economically disadvantaged because you have to meet that criteria to be an 8A. But we're waiting to see what that definition is. There's another, again, $2.5 billion. One is in a set aside, so $1.5 billion in a set aside. So we anticipate the Treasury, who has not issued any guidance yet, will allocate the fair share of that 2.5 billion to tribes. And there's a $1 billion incentive that will plus up your future monies in this program. And so we anticipate Treasury will allocate a portion of that 1 billion to tribes as well. So all told, lots of money available to tribes for this program. Okay, some key dates to keep in mind, and these might slip. We don't know. Treasury's been slipping all their dates so far. December 11th, which is a Saturday, the initial applications are due for states, territories, district, and tribal governments. That's an initial application. I'll go through, there's 4 items that are due in that initial application, and I'll cover that towards the end. And then by February 11th, your final application information is due, which is an additional 2 items. And we'll go through, Treasury just issued, they updated their guidance earlier this week that said, if you want to know what we're going to ask for in the application, look at the last application. So I'll have an example from the last application, as well as a link to where you can find that application itself, and you can see what information Treasury looked for back when the program was originally created in 2010. And so therefore, what they've told us they will likely be looking for now. They claim they're going to do an online application portal in the coming weeks. So if you're already used to filling out the application for the capital projects fund, the $100 million capital projects fund, but anticipate that you're going to have an online portal requirement. Not sure what they're going to do for tribes, especially say Alaskan Native villages who don't have reliable access to the internet. And so I'm not sure how they've been handling that with all the other stuff we have to file online. And then they claim they're going to see that. They claim we're also going to see policy guidance soon. And I'll cover off some of the key policy guidance questions that are still outstanding. And then as I go through, I will be happy to take questions as I go through, or wait till the end. So whichever works for you guys. Now, when you file an application, after that final application is done, the statute says the secretary will approve that application if a state, which now includes tribe in the statute, has identified a specific department that's designated to implement the program, has taken all the legal actions necessary to participate, has filed their application for approval. That's why you've got to get that application in, and has executed an allocation agreement. If you want to see what the allocation agreement looks like, I'll be happy to send you the last version. It's pretty long, it's pretty detailed, and it's pretty requiring. So one of the major things you're going to have to do is be able to say to Treasury, yes, we can comply with all of the rules of the statute, the policy guidance, and this allocation agreement. It's also important to note that tribes can participate if they have a contractual arrangement with another tribe or state, or an authorized agent that's supervised by the tribe or the state. So even if you don't get your application in, the way I read this, and this is something for policy guidance from Treasury, and we're hoping they address it because this was a question raised to them. Even if I, as a tribe, don't apply, maybe I'm too small. Maybe I don't have enough bandwidth, enough capacity to do this program. Or maybe there's just I don't have any small businesses. So there's nobody to invest in for the tribe. Can I still participate through another tribe? So can I still, for example, take my allocation, but tag on to somebody else's program? And we think the answer to that is yes, because there's a provision in the new law, in the amendments that happened under ARPA, that says tribes can participate as a single tribe or jointly. We still don't know, does that mean if tribe A designs a program and tribe B doesn't do anything. They raise their hand, they get the NOI, and then they don't want to do all the work. But they say to tribe A, hey, we want to join your program and we want to send you our money and we want to run your program. We think Treasury will allow that. We're not sure how we're going to tell Treasury that. So that's why we're waiting for policy guidance. But that would mean tribe A submits an application on behalf of themselves and tribe B. So this allows for the multi-tribal or joint program that the statute explicitly allows for. So we're waiting to see what happens. So even if you don't, again, do a full application and do an individual program design for yourself, what I've been encouraging tribes to do, especially smaller tribes with little to no capacity, to look around and see who's doing something and then see if you can tag along. And I'll give you some examples of kind of how that's shaping up. Okay, here's a summary of the 5 types of programs that you have to tell Treasury you're going to implement on December 11th. This is one of the selections you have to be able to say by December 11th. We're going to do one or all or some or all of these programs. And you also have to tell Treasury, here's where we want to put our money. So you have to break it up. So we have capital access programs, which is basically a portfolio loan loss reserve, usually set up by the state, but it could be set up by a lender. So Bank of America, of course, has loan loss reserves for their own banks. So third-party administration, or you can set up your own loan loss reserve. I wouldn't recommend it, but you could, in which it's basically a giant insurance policy, right? So if you have a lot of tribal members, and some of the tribes in USET have a lot of tribal members, right? So if you have a lot of tribal members and you decide, well, this is the program we're going to do, you set up basically an insurance policy, create a reserve, the lender and the borrower. So your tribal member goes to Bank of Tennessee, says, or Bank of Massachusetts, and says, we want to borrow money for our small business. That lender is in your lender network. The lender says, okay, everybody puts in a share of the loan into the loan loss reserve. And then you match that share with the SSBCI money. So if the loan is for $500,000 and they have to do a 5% contribution for the loan loss reserve, the lender and the borrower put in 5% each. So that's 10%. You take that $50,000, and you get that matched by the SSBCI money. A loan guarantee program, I'm sure we're all familiar with loan guarantee programs, but your SSBCI funds are used to provide the loan guarantee. So you got to put that money somewhere in some type of loan guarantee account. You have to have lenders who are making the loans, right? So you're not making the loan directly. You're telling a lender, we will guarantee the loan for our tribal members, small businesses. You've got to set up all your terms, and I'll go through in more detail about how you would typically operate a loan guarantee program. A collateral support program is a way to provide additional cash collateral for your small business, tribal members, small businesses. So if you have tribal members who live on reservation, on trust land, and of course they can't mortgage the land, maybe they can second mortgage their house if they own the house, or they only have a car, they have very limited collateral or access to collateral. And a bank says, yeah, we'll make you a $100,000 loan, but we need $50,000 in collateral. And your tribal member only has $25,000. You can, through a collateral support program, take your SSBCI money and provide that additional $25,000 in cash collateral to the bank. Loan participation programs, these are more direct loan programs, so you can buy the loan, buy a portion of the loan from the bank. You can participate directly, so tribal member needs $100,000. The bank says, well, we're only willing to lend 50, and you have a loan participation program, and you say, okay, we'll lend the other 50 to the tribal member directly. So that's a direct loan. Or the bank says, okay, we'll lend the 100,000, but tribe, you have to agree to buy back $50,000 of that, half of that. and buy into that loan that way. So you'll buy half that loan back. So a couple of different ways to do loan participation. Usually what we also see when states have created these loan participation programs, many of them have created them as direct loan, excuse me, or re-lending programs. And I'll talk about in the context of CDFIs, how you might leverage your CDFI to do a direct loan or re-lending program. And then the final type of program is a venture capital program. This is usually equity investment. So you're taking the SSBCI money and you're using it to buy an equity position in the small business. You might also do an equity type debt financing. So it might be some type of, it doesn't have to be this way, because of course, we're not talking about millions of dollars, but you could structure it for early stage. Now, this is usually from an equity investment standpoint, any stage of business is eligible. You can of course limit it. Most of the states that did VCP did very early stage, not seed, but early stage. So we'll give you money to actually start up or very early stage equity financing in order to ramp up. And then the other half of the states did a late stage. So what might be called mezzanine financing. And that was for expansion. So you can use it at any stage, and I'll go through in a little bit more detail kind of what these stages are and the different types of financing, equity financing structures that the states did. But in short, these are your 5 program options that we know of. We don't know if Treasury will allow a new option. And this is where we have an opportunity to come up with something new for what tribes need. Okay, statutorily, if you do loan guarantee and down, loan guarantee, collateral, loan participation, or venture capital, which I think are going to be the 3 or 4 of those are going to be the primary ones that I'm hearing tribes talk about. Here's what you have to meet from an eligibility requirement. You have to demonstrate a minimum of 1-to-1 leverage. That means for every dollar you get in SSBCI money, you have to find another dollar in quote unquote private financing. This becomes question number 1 for Treasury. Can tribes be that other dollar? So can I take your federal money, match it with tribal money, and meet my 1-to-1 leverage? We don't know the answer to that question. If the answer is no, that means you have to go find private dollars or other dollars. And so that'll be a little bit more challenging when it comes to equity financing, because the venture capital seems ripe for, oh, I'm going to use this money to capitalize a tribal business, tribal owned business, my Section 17, or my tribally chartered enterprise. And I'm going to take the federal money, I'm going to put in my own money, and now all of a sudden I've doubled the money investment that I was originally going to make, right? Because I got federal money. So question number 2, can we invest in our own tribal owned businesses? We don't know the answer to that either. So until we really understand that, right now, the only thing we really should be thinking about is how do I help tribal member businesses? Because I don't know if I can help my own business yet. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that they will find a way. They've been hemming and hawing about it. We don't know. We're just worried about this, that, and the other. So there's a lot of pressure on them to, of course, allow tribes to invest in their own businesses with this. You have to show an expectation of funding, lending at least 10 times the federal contribution. So if you do a loan program and you get, let's say, $1 million from SSBCI, you have to show that you're going to get $100 million in loans. So you're going to leverage your $10 million. You're going to leverage your $1 million into $10 million worth of lending activity. The financial lenders have to put their own capital resources at risk, a minimum of 20%. So that means if you do a loan guarantee program or a loan participation program, You cannot guarantee more than 80%, and you cannot participate in more than 80% of the loan. The lender has to have their own capital at risk. There is a size. It's a small business initiative defined as 500 employees, but for purposes of these programs, no more than 750, average loan principal of 5 million, but no more than 20 million. I don't think anybody, well, there's a handful of tribes that got this much money. I don't think there are any tribes in USET that would have gotten this much money, but maybe. Other statutory requirements. Now, I want to go through these because this is the information you have to provide in your second phase of the application. So you have to show them you're going to get a 1-to-1 leverage, a 10-to-1 leverage on your loan programs. You've designed the program for your financial lenders to have 20% at risk and your target size. You also have to show what is the benefit to the state, tribe, residents, your tribal members, and their businesses. You have to show your operational skill, capacity, and experience. You have to show if you're going to do a loan program, can you manage the increase? You have to show that you have internal accounting and administrative control systems. And then you also have to overall show a soundness of program design and how you're going to implement the plan. So we don't have to provide this information before December 11th, but we have to have this by February 11th. In addition, this is why we need the policy guidance. The secretary can also have additional requirements that are these additional minimum requirements. And in fact, in the policy guidance of 2014, the secretary said everybody's got to show these additional items. So not only your experience and capacity, which we saw before, but what's your investment authority? On December 11th, you have the third item you have to tell them. You have to tell them who's doing the program for you, what programs you're going to do, and how much money you're going to put towards each program. You also have to show them that you have the legal authority or will enact the legal authority to actually operate the program. So that's what this investment authority question is. Do you have the legal authority to do what you're doing? Now, for most tribes, that's going to be a resolution saying we're going to adopt these programs or this is what we're going to do. But some tribes might already have lending laws on the books. They might already have some type of small business lending program on the books. They might have investment policies on the books. So if you're taking, if you're trying to figure out how to invest your money and you have an investment committee or investment policies, do those have to be amended for you to take the SSBCI money and invest it in a tribal member small business? Some tribes actually prohibit investing in tribal member small businesses as investment policies, or they have an investment policy, the prohibition on investing in small business at all, or startups, or early stage. So if I'm not saying that you have to do that. You could focus your investment in later stage businesses and still continue to comply with your investment policy, but it will require you to go in and look at that. What are your loan terms and conditions? What's the lender capital at risk? Are you charging any premiums? What's the state going to contribute? In this case, the tribe, and the purpose of the loan. So for the last program, again, Treasury imported these additional minimum program requirements, and we're going to have to answer these questions by February 11th. Okay, so let's talk about the loan support programs. I'm going to focus primarily on the loan guarantee and loan participation. Credit access, again, as a reserve fund. Multiple tribes could set up a reserve fund if you wanted to do that. This is probably not the kind of program that a single tribe could do. The state of California can do it because it's massive. But credit access, I'm not going to really focus on unless there's some interest. So I'm happy to answer questions offline about that. I will focus on loan guarantee and loan participation because that seems to be the two programs that tribes are talking the most about. So first, with loan participation or relending, again, you're buying the loan or you're participating in the loan. What we saw in some cases, a handful of states actually did a relending program with their CDFIs. So California, for example, took about 25% of their money, and they basically just granted it to 2 CDFIs, one in Northern California, one in Southern California. State of Washington did the same thing. They took about half their money and just granted it to a CDFI and said, you go out and lend this money. And so that's an option to think about. I'll go to that in a little bit more detail when I talk about administration. But this is one way to participate. Other states, of course, make direct loans. Many tribes have direct lending programs for their tribal members. So you could use this money for that direct lending program. You, of course, have to provide the match. So if you got $1 million from SSBCI and you want to just turn that into new loans to your tribal members, small businesses, then you've got to be able to make $10 million in loans. It's not $1 million in loans. It's got to be $10 million in loans. So that means you got to come up with the other $9 million, or at a minimum 1-to-1. So you get $1 million, you're going to lend it out. You got to put your own $1 million in from a loan standpoint. It's very clear, at least from the last go round, that Treasury anticipated that states would put their own money in to these loan programs. It's not clear that they could be the match for the equity investment. So that's the difference between the loan and the equity investment. Loan, if you do a direct lending program, you're likely going to have to be the one to provide the match, at least 1-to-1 and up to 10-to-1. If you do the equity program, we don't know if you're going to be able to be the other $1 for the match. So developing equity programs is going to be a little bit harder until we get some firm guidance. Okay, the loan guarantee, we pretty much know what that is. You're going to go to your lender network. You're going to say, we want to set up a loan guarantee program for you. You do the underwriting, and we will just guarantee the loan. Up to 80% is the most you can do. Most states did somewhere between a 30 and 50% loan guarantee with their lender network. I'll go into who qualifies as the lender, but this is kind of one way, of course, to spread more risk, because you're only having to put a portion of the money up or keeping it saved, right? And then you've got the loan, the bank is actually operating your program, right? They're doing the lending, they're doing the underwriting. You have some underwriting requirements. You have some negotiation requirements at the beginning. But then once you've got that guarantee going, you can set up that guarantee however you want to, or however the bank will negotiate with you. So for policy guidance criteria around the loan programs, you have to have qualified lenders. So for Treasury, that meant the lender has to have sufficient commercial lending experience. So if you have a CDFI that's only been doing individual small loans, and doesn't have any small business lending experience, they're not going to be a qualified lender. Now, the native CDFI network, Jackson Brossi's group, has been trying to get Treasury to say, we have CDFIs who don't have commercial lending, but they have small business lending experience with, tribal member who starts up a little construction company and they lend them a few $1,000s to get started. That should count. I know the native CDFI network is waiting to hear from Treasury on what does this qualified lender mean. And you need to be sure that native CDFIs can be qualified lenders. CDFIs are definitely qualified lenders. They're in the group, but there's a real question of how much of this do they have to show. So that's kind of another issue still out there. Loan purposes and requirements. So the proceeds have to be used for any business purpose, but there are some limitations. You can't use it to acquire or hold passive investments. So a tribal member can't come to you and say, I'm going to start up an investment company, lend me some money, or do a loan guarantee for me, and I'm just going to take it and I'm just going to buy property and I'm going to let it just sit there. They can't do that. So the idea here is jobs. Jobs, the number one benefit that we saw Treasury required is how many jobs are you creating? So you have to be prepared to answer that question. So the business purpose, any business purpose, jobs. But the borrower can't be engaged in speculative activities. So again, I can't borrow money in order to invest. Lending activities. So your online lending companies are not eligible for investment. Even if they say tribal enterprises are eligible, your online lending companies aren't eligible and your gaming enterprises are not eligible. So this is, remember with PPP, for those of you who went through the PPP fiasco, where they tried to say no gaming entities were eligible for PPP, and then Vegas stood up and said, hey, wait a minute. And then Indian gaming got sucked into the Vegas vortex, and then they all got access to PPP. We have, lots of people have commented to Treasury that there are a lot of gaming enterprises that do a lot of other non-gaming activity, like running hotels and resorts and restaurants and those kinds of things. And so they need to take the same position that they took on this program that was taken for PPP. So that's been the major comment there. Online lenders, there, I know a handful of tribes with online lending enterprises who have said we should be a qualified lender. They don't have a list. It's banks, credit unions, and CDFIs. And so I know there's been somewhat of a push from the online lending group, NAFSA, and those guys to be eligible qualified lenders. So we'll see how that comes out. And of course, you can't engage in any illegal activity, so your dope business is not going to be eligible either. Permissible borrowers include, there's this long list. The key thing here that I like to point out is government-owned corporations. So it's clear, at least from the lending program, the loan programs, that at least in 2014, Treasury said you can lend to government-owned corporations. So we've pointed that out to them, said, keep that in there, make sure that includes tribal government-owned corporations. So that means that your Section 17 should be able to take advantage of the SSBCI program and get a loan and have that loan guaranteed by SSBCI money. If you're trying to capitalize your Section 17 or expand services, or maybe you're trying to get out from underneath a worse borrowing relationship. Okay, so that's what policy guidance says. We don't know what it's going to look like in the future. This is what we're waiting for, is this policy guidance from Treasury. So what are some of the program opportunities? As I said, you can do collateral support programs. That's a lot of work for maybe not very much activity. I think we're going to more likely see loan guarantees and direct lending opportunities. You can participate directly in debt financing for your tribal member owned or tribal owned businesses, because again, government corporations are eligible borrowers. You can partner with a CDFI for your loan programs. So they might be a lender that gets credit support from you, right? They're one of your qualified lenders for a loan guarantee. So you say to your CDFI, you make the loans, we'll guarantee it with the SSBCI money. They can administer the program for you, which I'll go into a little bit more detail. They can borrow money from you, right? Some native CDFIs, I just saw a statistic. I think Jackson's complaining around about we don't have any money and we need to capitalize our CDFIs. Native CDFIs. This is one way to capitalize your native CDFI, right? You just give them your money and you give it to them as a grant and they use it to re-lend. And then everybody wins. Your CDFI gets money to lend. Now they have to match it. So you can't, if you got $1 million and you give them $1 million, they got to come up with another $1 million. But as from what we understand, and again, this is the Native CDFI network. So if any of you are part of that, encourage you to continue the conversations through that effort of what the NCN is trying to say to Treasury is, if we get money from the CDFI program, we should be able to use that money to match SSBCI money that comes in. Treasury has said in other circumstances, no, you can't use other federal money to match the SSBCI money. So the only challenge with granting money to the native CDFI is if they don't have, if they can't match the money that you give them, you're gonna have a little bit of a challenge, but that is one option. You can invest in them. You can make an equity investment in the CDFI. excuse me, again, lend to them, or they can be a grantee. Another discussion, and this goes back to what I was talking about, the multi-tribal discussion, focused on specific industries. So I know the ag people started talking about having an agricultural focused discussion, agricultural focused program. A construction program has come up, energy. So putting a bunch of tribes together to put a bunch of money into a fund that supports energy projects or energy companies, or it supports construction projects or construction companies, especially around loan guarantees and for construction companies, surety bond guarantees. Because a lot of tribal construction companies or tribal member construction companies have to get bonded. Your brand new construction company usually has to come to the tribe for the guarantee on the bond. You could use the SSBCI dollars to be that guarantee for surety bonds. Okay, so just some key attributes, and you have all this in more detail. So let me quickly go through the investment programs. These are the 4 types of investment programs that the states implemented the first time around. Tribes can follow any of these, or again, make up our own. The 2 areas that most people have been talking about is a co-investment program and a fund of funds program. So unless you have some real in-house equity investment expertise, the easiest thing to do is partner with an investment firm or a bunch of tribes in a this is a fund model. So you could do a single tribe, you put in your money, you find a private investor to put in their money into a fund, and then you split that money up across portfolio companies. Again, these are equity investments. They could be debt investments because you can do a combination of the 2, but this would be a single tribe fund. The key is who manages your fund and who's your private investor, and are you going to be able to find somebody to match that 500,000? In a fund of funds scenario, everybody's leveraging up, right? So you call Bill Lomax out at Goldman Sachs and you say, "Give me a fund. Get me a fund." There's a whole bunch of people running around now, Indian country, trying to identify opportunities to create funds using SSBCI. You have multiple tribes putting in their funds. Not all, don't have to be all, but some. So now you've got some more money to play with. You're getting private investors. The fund goes and finds them, and you can put more money on the street. And remember, like they say, money is like manure. It only works when you spread it around. So this is one way to get more money spread around across tribal businesses. Direct equity investment in the company or companies. Again, we don't know if we can capitalize our own tribal-owned small businesses. So we hope the answer to that is yes. You have a Section 17. It has a subsidiary, and you want to use the subsidiary to do a joint venture with Lockheed Martin. You take your SSBCI money, they're half the investment, Lockheed matches it. Now you've got a jointly owned subsidiary of your Section 17. We hope we can do that because we know there's lots of tribes itching to do that. One-stop shop. So something to think about in the context of the full small business ecosystem is ways to kind of put together, and New York did this. This is why I wanted to raise this. The state of New York did this. They gave all their money to basically an agency that was a one-stop shop. And it served from soup to nuts. So they had an incubator program, and you could take federal money. We have a DOI incubator program, Commerce CDA, and you can use your fiscal recovery fund money to support an incubator program for small businesses. Incubator program and or an accelerator program, which provides more education and resources. Combine that with the SSBCI technical assistance money, the $500 million grant, and then the investment is the SSBCI money itself. So you could, if you have a big enough, again, small business ecosystem, or you want to try and promote a small business ecosystem, you could literally put together fiscal recovery fund money, technical assistance money, and the SSBCI match and plus match money to provide a one-stop shop for your tribal members. Administration, can be third party. You can do it yourself directly. If you do it directly, you have to prove up all of those other criteria, that you meet all of those experience, capacity, skill, etc. Or you can hire somebody to do it. Even if you hire somebody, you have to show they meet that criteria. You can administer some of your money directly and give some of your money to a third party, or any combination thereof. CDFIs can also serve, as I said earlier. Jackson's been trying to get, his group has been trying to get Beating the Bushes to be the administrator for tribal SSBCI money. Some CDFIs, in fact, are basically one-stop shops. So that's one way to promote that model. This is the form. So this is what we've got to be ready to fill out. The first two items are what we have to provide by December 11th. Your designated entity, their contact information, and by program type, the money, how you're going to split your money up. So if you got $1 million, you have 5 programs to choose from. You have to tell Treasury by December 11th, we're going to do these 3 programs and we're going to split the money up in these 3 ways. That's what you have to have so you have to have some sense of what you want to do by December 11th. By February 11th, you have to have your final application in. I anticipate you will be able to change your allocation number. So let's say today you go, oh, we're going to do all 5 programs and we're just going to split it up 5 ways. And then by February 11th, you go, no, we're just going to do 2 programs. I anticipate we're going to be able to amend our application, but that's a question now for Treasury. But by February 11th, at a minimum, you're going to have to say, here are the programs we're doing. You have to talk about the background, summary of program guidelines, historical performance, if any, and expected performance. And you have to have a narrative statement for each program. You have to do this for each program you decide to do. You have to show how you're going to get your leverage ratios, the 1-to-1 and the 10-to-1 by year. And then you have to show your program results. This goes to the benefits, how many jobs you're going to create, how many small business loans are you going to make, or how many investments are you going to make? Are you going to see an increase in tax revenue? I think for the tribe, if they let us use tribal enterprises, maybe that is increase in enterprise revenue or revenue to the tribe from the enterprise. You have to show your management experience. You have to show your auditing compliance and reporting oversight capacity. And if you want to see what the actual form, it's only a 4-page form, but all this information makes it about a 15-page submission, because it's 3 pages per program. And then you have to do these program results not to exceed 5 pages. This is per program. So if you pick 3 programs, you have to do the 3rd bullet and the 5th bullet for each program. Okay, next steps, December 11th. Who's going to operate and administer the program for you? We're going to do it in-house. We're going to do it out-house. What programs do we want to implement? How do we want to split our money? And do we need to take any legal action in order to implement this? So program design has to start now, and you got to be done by February 11th. And then February 11th, you have to have the full information into Treasury. So with that, I know I ran a little bit over. I apologize. It's just a lot of information. So, and I did have a couple of extra slides in here, Rebecca, so I'll send you my updated presentation.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Thank you, Pilar, for offering this much more, I think, detailed understanding and nuance of the program and well, the greater SBCI program, but then also these individual programs that tribal nations can pursue to spend their allocated dollars. And I know we went over a little bit of time, but this is all great information, and we'll make sure to share the updated slides with everyone after this event. So I just wanted to give a few more comments or just some final statements. Pilar mentioned, and I just wanted to remind that NAFOA has been partnering, and NAFOA stands for the Native American Finance Officers Association, along with the National Congress of American Indians, NCAI, in partnership with the Department of Treasury, has been doing a series of tribal workshops targeted to go more in depth on the SSBCI program. It was I think it was a very quick turnaround, not a lot of notice. They started this week. Next week, there are the final two presentations, and we'll put a link to the NOFOA website in the chat function. Next Tuesday, November 2nd, is a workshop session called Direct Credit Support, Loan Participation, and Venture Capital Programs. And then the final session on November 4th is called Partnering with CDFIs and Compliance. And I think that would be a really good session to understand more of that compliance and what partnership CDFIs can play in that process. So I'm going to see if I can paste that. Yep, the website is now in the chat function. And I thank you, Mado, everyone, for your time. Mado, thank you, Pilar, for your presentation, as well as Doug. He had to jump off early to make another meeting, so he apologizes for that. We hope that everyone enjoyed the panel presentations this morning, and we hope that you got some benefit from this dedicated time to talk about the SSBCI program. Any feedback on how we can make this session and future sessions beneficial and helpful to you and your community, we would greatly appreciate it.